Dear learners, today let us examine the work of Marx and Engels. Of all the modern philosophers, the ideas of Karl Marx are the most influential. Along with Engels, Marx was the most prolific and the most powerful of the 19th century's theorists. The theories that Marx and Engels proposed have had a significant impact on the socio-political of the world. Their worldview, besides shaping the ideology of nation-states, political parties, has also shaped diverse academic disciplines, including political science, economics, literary studies, and philosophy. Now, let us examine the life and work of Karl Marx. Karl Heinrich Marx, a Prussian-born German writer, was born on 5th May 1818 in Trier, which was then a part of the Kingdom of Prussia. He died on 14th of May 1883 in London. He was one of the most influential writers of the 19th century. Though Marx was born into a Jewish family, his father, Heinrich Marx, converted to Christianity and became a Lutheran. Marx had a Lutheran upbringing until he renounced religion in his teen years. Marx displayed a keen interest in philosophy even while he was at school. Notwithstanding his father's interest, he pursued a doctoral degree in philosophy from the University of Bonn. While at the University of Bonn, Marx was seriously involved in the study of Hegel's philosophy and wrote pieces of poetry. He was later transferred to the University of Berlin in 1837. In 1837, Marx was engaged to Jenny von Westphalen, who was significantly wealthy. The engagement and the subsequent marriage caused a controversy in Prussia as Jenny was a baroness. From 1836 to 1843, Marx was involved with the Young Hegelians group. Around this time, Marx dabbled in writing a novel titled Scorpion and Felix. Unfortunately, the novel hasn't survived, and a drama called Olamen and Love Poems. Marx abandoned literature and undertook a study of English and Italian art. He associated with his mentor Bruno Bauer and edited Hegel's Philosophy of Religion, which was published in 1840. In 1841, Marx completed and submitted his doctoral thesis, which was titled The Difference Between the Democritean and the Epicurean Philosophy of Nature. The thesis was a highly original piece of work where Marx demonstrated that theology must yield to the superior wisdom of philosophy. In many ways, this was the signature statement of Marx in his early writings. For instance, in the essay on the Jewish question, Marx postulated that one cannot turn secular questions into theological ones, but should rather invert and transform a theological question into a secular one. The writings of Marx were controversial, and the University of Berlin was known for its conservatism. Hence, Marx decided to submit his thesis to the more liberal University of Jena, whose faculty awarded him a PhD in April 1841. Marx was keen on pursuing an academic career in Prussia, but his innumerous opponents ensured that Marx was kept out of the Prussian academia. Marx then pursued a journalistic career. The Prussian press was affected by censorship and political intervention. Hence, Marx decided to migrate to Paris. Along with Jenny, Marx moved to Paris, where he contributed significantly to the workers' movements. 28th August 1844 was a landmark day in the history of ideas. It was the day that Marx met the German socialist Friedrich Engels at the Café de la Régence in Paris. They forged a lifelong friendship. Engels showed Marx his recently published The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844. He convinced Marx that the working class would be the agent and the instrument of the final revolution in history. Between 1843 and 1845, Marx undertook an intensive study of political economy. He was immersed in the works of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and James Mill, the French socialists and the history of France. The study of political economy was a lifelong endeavor of Marx. It resulted in his major economic work, the three-volume series called Capital. Marx's writings had three influences. Firstly, Hegel's dialectics. Secondly, French utopian socialism. And thirdly, English economics. Together with his earlier study of dialectics, the studying that Marx did during his time in Paris meant that all the components of Marxism, or political economy as Marx preferred to call it, were in place by the autumn of 1844. On the request of the Prussian government, Marx was expelled from Paris in 1854. From 1845 to 1847, Marx lived in Brussels before he moved to London along with Engels. The move to London was very productive for Marx. He wrote his first great work on historical materialism titled The German Ideology. Unfortunately, the work was censored and was never published in his lifetime. Marx wrote his second great work, The Poverty of Philosophy, which was published in 1847. The Poverty of Philosophy was in many ways a response to Proudhon's The Philosophy of Poverty. In 1846, Marx and Engels combined to draft one of the most politically influential treatises, that is, the Communist Manifesto. The manifesto presents the arguments justifying the need for a communist league. It attacks socialist and liberal political parties which were in existence then. Marx and Engels argued the proletariat to overthrow capitalist society and to replace it with socialism. Marx briefly stayed in Cologne before returning to England again. He was instrumental in organizing working class movements. Along with Engels, he started the Commune, the Workers' International, and the First International. During his stay in London, Marx began to contribute to the New York Times. Marx wrote on diverse issues ranging from the question of Indian independence, slave trade, Jewish question, and apart from dealing with philosophy, history, and economics. Some of Marx's prominent works include The Class Struggles in France, published in 1850, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, Grand Risée, A Contribution to the Critique of Political Economy, Writings on the U.S. Civil War, Theories of Surplus Value, Value, Price and Profit, Volume 1 of Das Kapital, Critique of the Gotha Program, Notes on Wagner. Marx was very influential as concepts such as Marxism, communism, socialism, and materialism. His work has affected the trajectories of disciplines such as politics, economics, sociology, and even natural sciences. His theories include labor theory of value, surplus value, class struggle, alienation, and materialist conception of history. Let us now examine the life and work of Engels. Friedrich Engels, Prussian-born German writer, was born on the 28th of November 1820. He passed away on the 5th of August 1895 in England. He was a German social scientist, author, political theorist, philosopher, and the father of Marxist theory alongside Karl Marx. In 1845, Engels published the hugely popular The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844, based on his personal observations and research that he performed in the mills of Manchester. In 1848, he partnered with Marx and wrote the Communist Manifesto. He assisted Marx financially and also aided him while Marx was researching Das Kapital. Post the death of Marx, Engels edited the second and the third volumes of Das Kapital. Engels lived his life in various cities of Europe, including Manchester, Paris, Brussels, and finally moved to London. His earliest philosophical influence was Hegel, and he was actively associated with the young Hegelians. Born into an affluent family, Engels' father was a cotton merchant who had massive business interests. His family was very pious. Engels, however, turned an atheist while he was at college and went on to side with radical groups. He was exiled initially to Switzerland, and warrants were issued in Prussia to arrest Engels. In the 1840s, his family sent Engels to Manchester. The family thought Engels would become more interested in business if he visited Manchester. However, in Manchester, Engels observed the plight of the factory workers and was moved by their plight. He was convinced that the efforts of socialist parties would not be successful unless the proletariat was politically organized. He organized workers' unions in Manchester. His experiments in Manchester resulted in Engels publishing The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844, which was considered to be his seminal work. His other works include Revolution in Science, published in 1878, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, 1880, and the hugely popular The Origin of the Family, Private Property in State, which was published in 1844. Engels lived in with Mary Burns and after her death with her sister Lizzie Burns. Engels was a fun-loving personality who was also fond of activities such as fox hunting and picnics. Engels was a patron of workers' movements and funded Marx for most of his life. Post the death of Marx, it was Engels who compiled the list of Marx works and edited them. He edited the complete work and in few cases filled the gaps in the unfinished works of Marx. When Engels died of cancer in 1895, he was one of the most respected political figures in England. As we have discussed above, the theories proposed by Karl Marx and Engels have influenced the culture of politics and governance. These theories discuss society, economics, politics, history, and culture, and have been collectively termed Marxism. Marx and Engels believed that human societies evolve as various economic classes struggle with each other. Class struggle is inevitable and necessary, and it is through a conflict between the ownership class, the section of the population that controls the means of production, and the dispossessed laboring class, which actually produces value, that a society evolves. Capitalism was over 100 years old when Marx began to theorize it. He termed capitalism the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Marx and Engels believed that capitalism was run by the wealthy classes for their own benefit. They predicted that, like its predecessor, socio-economic conditions, capitalism is fraught with contradictions which create internal tensions. These tensions, Marx prophesied, would lead to its self-destruction. Marx believed that capitalism as an economic system will be replaced by socialism. Marx further argued that class antagonisms under capitalism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat would result in the working classes achieving political power. The antagonism would result in the formation of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The proletariat would establish a classless society. The society would be governed by a free association of producers. Marxism states that the evolution of socialism or communism is inevitable. It also advocates the need for revolutionary action to topple capitalist nation states to usher in communist societies. Most of the salient ideas of Marxism are found in the Communist Manifesto, preface to the contribution to the critique of political economy, and in the 3 volumes of Das Kapital. Marx believed that the human society that we witness is actually a superstructure. All the aspects of the society, including governance, politics, art, literature, are largely influenced by the modes of production. The modes of production, in other words, is the nature of the economy. The economics is the base of the society, and the cultural aspects form the superstructure. The economic base is invisible, but its power is all-pervading. To change the society, for Marx, one needs to address the issue of the base. Thus, for Marx, change in the nature of the mode of production or in the nature of the economics alone can bring a change in the society. In a classless society built on control and ownership of the means of production, Marx believed that the concept of work would be altered. Marx believed that economic determinism, dialectical materialism, and class struggle were the 3 principles. Marx postulated that all past history is a struggle between hostile and competing economic classes in state of change. Marxism also believes in the theory of dialectic. Opposing sides are brought together where they confront each other. They finally wither away to form a new force. However, dialectic happens only when the nature of the confrontation and engagement are organic. Marx and Engels have influenced literature in a massive way. The theories of Marx and Engels have given rise to the Marxist literary criticism. Marxist literary criticism is based on the idea of the dialectic. It takes into account the inevitability of class struggle and the idea of a base and superstructure. Most of the literary critics who adopt Marxist literary criticism are mostly sympathizers of Marxism. In its initial decades, Marxist critique of literature viewed literary works as reflections of the social institutions from which they originate. Its goals were to assess the political tendency of a literary work and determine whether the social content and the literary form are progressive, as it analyzed the class constructs demonstrated in literary text. For Marx, literature is a social institution which is an integral part of the superstructure, and it has a specific ideological function. The ideological function of a text is largely shaped by the background and the ideology of the author. The prominent exponents of Marxist literary theory include Lucas, Raymond Williams, Terry Eagleton, Friedrich Jameson, Slavoj Žižek, and Ijaz Ahmed. Over the last 4 decades, Marxist literary theory has shaped the emergence of new modes of literary criticism, including feminism, post-colonialism, and post-structuralism. It has also spawned the growth of institutions such as the Frankfurt School and the Birmingham School, which have grown into respectable spaces of literary and cultural criticism. Today, it is very hard to define what Marxist literary criticism is. The English literary theorist Terry Eagleton defined Marxist criticism as not merely a sociology of literature concerned with how novels got published, whether they mention the working class. Its aim is to explain literary work more fully, and this means a sensitive attention to its forms, styles, and meanings. But it also means grasping those forms, styles, and meanings as the product of a particular history. During the second half of the 20th century, Marxist literary criticism became a complex field of academic inquiry as the subdisciplines that it helped create began to influence it. In the 20th century, many writers were influenced by Marx and Engels. In addition to being the guiding principle behind most literary works published in communist and socialist Russia, which included the famous Maxim Gorky, Marxism also influenced many Western writers, including Richard Wright, Claude McKay, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Bertolt Brecht, Mulkraj Anand, C.L.R. James, Arthur Miller, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, amongst many others. George Orwell was also deeply influenced by the Marxist and the socialist theories as he wrote his works, The Animal Farm. In addition to these authors, popular film authors, songwriters, and artists, including Bob Dylan, Bob Marley, were also influenced by the works of Marx and Engels. The ideas that Marx proposed in the Communist Manifesto, preface to the contribution to the critique of political economy and Das Kapital, have a massive influence over literature and literary studies. Marx's comment, published in the Manifesto, that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle, has emerged as one of the most accepted statements. Most literary critics accept class struggle as the engine room of history. To understand the course of history, one must analyze the class relations that typify different historical epochs, the antagonisms and forms of class struggle embodied in such class relations. This involves the development of class consciousness and follows the revolutionary movements that challenge the dominant classes. It extends to rating the success of these revolutions in the developing new modes of production and forms of social organization. In contrast to the Manifesto, the preface to the contribution to the critique of political economy and capital focus on the unfolding logic of a system rather than class struggle. These provide an alternative account of historical development and emphasize the self-destructive contradictions and the law of motion of specific modes of production. The preface argues that society's economic organization consists of a distinctive pattern of forces and relations of productions. From this foundation arises a complex political and ideological superstructure where economic development impacts upon societal progress. Capital was more concerned with the genesis and dynamism of capitalism. It refers to a class struggle mainly in the context of the struggle between capital and labor within capitalism rather than over its suppression. Capital was less concerned with forecasting how capitalism would be overthrown than considering how it had developed and how it functioned. The key to understanding this logic was the commodity form of social relations, a form that was most fully developed only in capitalism. Now, let us understand the ideologies. It is through the theories of class struggle, politics, and economics that Marxist literary criticism emerged. The thought behind Marxist criticism is that the works of literature are mere products of history that can be analyzed by looking at the social and material conditions in which they were constructed. Marx's Capital states that the mode of production of material life determines altogether the social, political, and intellectual life processes. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, the social being that determines their consciousness. Put simply, the social institution of the author determines the types of characters that will develop, the political ideas displayed, and the economic statements developed in the text. Although Marx and Engels detailed theories of socialism in the mid-19th century, it was not until 1920s that Marxist literary theory was systematized. The great impetus for this standardization came after the October Revolution of 1917 in Russia. October Revolution was significant as it instilled the belief in socialist understanding of governance and society. While these ideals developed, socialist realism was accepted as the highest form of literature, a theory which is based on an art movement that depicted and glorified the proletariat's struggle towards societal progress. These ideas guided both literary creation and the official literary criticism in Russia, where works focused on the lives of the different classes. In the years since then, the Russian beliefs regarding literary theory have been modified to acknowledge that literary creation is a result of both subjective inspiration and objective influence of the writer's surroundings. This system of belief relies on the social classes as well as the economic and political development of society. Thus, Marx's theories intertwined expertly with the emerging ideologies of the new Russian movement and spread throughout the world. Marx is considered to be one of the most influential figures in human history. Revolutionary socialist governments advocating Marxist concepts came to power in many countries. In 1922, the Soviet Union became the first socialist state in the world. In 1949, People's Republic of China came into being. Many countries in Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America embraced various forms of communism and socialism. Many labor unions and workers' parties worldwide are influenced by Marxism. Marxism has spawned various kinds of socialist sub-branches including Leninism, Stalinism, Trotskyism, and Maoism. Towards the end of the 20th century, with the collapse of the USSR and the Eastern Bloc, Marxism seems to have been on decline. However, the Latin America spring in the continent of South America, the rise of the left parties in Asia indicate that Marxism remains to be a dominant political ideology. In the 20th century, Marx is placed alongside other prominent social scientists like Emily Durkheim and Max Weber. He is regarded as one of the principal architects of modern social science. Dear learners, I hope you enjoyed the lesson on Marx and Engels. I hope you'll be inspired by this lesson to read more about these two philosophers. It was nice meeting you. Thank you.